One of the most beloved and trusted voices in British broadcasting, writer, musician, and presenter Mark Radcliffe began his entertainment journey as an assistant producer at Piccadilly Radio, working on shows such as Transmission, which celebrated artists of the local scene. A move to BBC Radio 1 during the late 1980s resulted in a successful union with broadcaster Mark Riley, which became one of the most popular and enduring partnerships in broadcasting. Mark and Lard defined convention, bringing an irreverent, zany alternative to Matthew Bannister's Radio 1 for the best part of 15 years. In 2004, Mark and Lard bid farewell to Radio 1 and went their separate ways, and while Riley cultivated a loyal audience on weekday evenings on Six Music, Radcliffe moved to Late Night Radio 2 until 2007, when the broadcaster paired him with fellow broadcaster Stuart McConey. Radcliffe joined another successful partnership, and a move to Six Music in 2011 cemented their status as the consummate radio team. Beyond radio, for over 2 decades, Mark presided over the BBC coverage of Glastonbury and has provided narration for the retrospective compilation series Top of the Pops 2. I caught up with one of my broadcasting heroes to talk Shire horses, music, and his recollections on a glittering career in radio. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Mark Radcliffe.
Cool. So, Mark, welcome to Beyond the Title. Throughout the history of music, there has always been pockets of creativity in almost every community in Britain. Why do you think Manchester was so pivotal to the story of music during the 80s and 90s?
Well, I think a lot of it came out of a kind of it was sort of a big industrial hub, really. So I think there was a lot of money and there was a lot of kind of projects and there was a lot of philanthropy. And so there's always been a kind of history of the arts being supported. So I think that's kind of probably the historical backdrop to it. But I also think that there was a great rivalry with Liverpool, which is just down the road. People, perhaps not everybody knows that Manchester and Liverpool are about 40 minutes apart. But they're very different places. And so as soon as the Beatles start coming out of Liverpool, Manchester starts thinking, hang on, we can do this as well. There's great rivalry there. But I also think there's a great independent spirit in Manchester. You know, it was kind of always seen itself as the second city. I know Birmingham claims this in terms of, it probably is in terms of size of population. I'm not sure about that, but I think Manchester always felt like it was the second city and was sort of the cultural hub of the north, if you like. So I think that it's in that sense, it's always been very fertile ground for creativity. And also it rains a lot, and so you've got to stay inside and write some songs and learn some instruments. So, you know, you can't, it's like we can't go sunbathing all the time. We've got to find something to do. You know, when I went to Shetland, a lot of people are brilliant on the fiddle up there. The folk music players are fantastic up there. But basically it's dark for 6 months. So they can just, all they can do is stay in with a fiddle and a bottle of whiskey. That's why they're all brilliant.
A few years ago, we had the pleasure of welcoming the legendary Pete Price on the show, and he said that in the 1960s, he was in the perfect place to soak in the phenomenon of the time. Looking back, how significant was being in Manchester to being part of the Manchester Revolution?
For me,
Yeah.
for me, well, I was lucky because I went to Manchester University from not far away, Bolton, which is only in Greater Manchester now. But I went to Manchester University in 1976, and that was the year that punk rock really exploded. And so that music felt very exciting, and it was a very exciting time for me because that was the first time I'd lived away from home. And so that music felt like the kind of noise and clamour that was going on inside my head. And then you became aware of Factory Records, and Buzzcocks had a label called New Hormones, and they made an EP called Spiral Scratch, which was the first independent record released by a British band. And so when I left university and started working for Piccadilly Radio, you know, I've been to all the gigs, I've been playing in bands, been to all the gigs, so I kind of knew everyone on the scene. And when I went to Piccadilly Radio and started to say to the bosses there, we should be playing all this music, and they let me have a little radio show, which is where I started on the radio. I just felt really happy to be a part of that. And Tony Wilson of Factory Records was very inspiring, really. He was always saying to us, "You don't have to go to London, you know. We can do it all here. We don't have to wait for someone in London to give us permission to do it."
Mm.
He was a real enabler, and he gave us real confidence, I think. So for me, that, you know, being the only person with a radio show in Manchester, and all that music was sort of exploding out of the local streets, was very lucky, and I felt very privileged. And so that was a really great kind of, you know, that was a great starting point for me in radio.
What is his legacy?
Well, that I think me, and it's funny really, because as I'm talking to you today, there's the big argument about whether Andy Burnham, the mayor of Manchester, should have been allowed to stand as an MP. And I think Tony Wilson would have been a great mayor of Manchester. You know, I mean, he was very involved when they tried to set up something called regional assemblies, which didn't happen in the end. He was very committed to that. So I think that for all kinds of writers, broadcasters, musicians, you know, he was just someone who made us feel that, you know, just because we were in Manchester didn't mean it didn't matter. It could have a national impact, and we didn't have to move to London to do it. And so I think his legacy is just that kind of, is really a generation of kind of media and creatives, you know, and politicians who really kind of think that, you know, where you live, it should be your first priority, and the issues and that come out of that, and the work that comes out of that, and the art that's created there, may or may not, but it may go on to have national and international significance. And so I think that's Tony's legacy, to give us that, to give us that great confidence that the city of Manchester was as much as we would need, and it was up to other people to take notice of what we were doing, rather than for us to travel the world and tell them about it.
Do you remember the first time you met Mark Riley?
I do. I do. Funnily enough, Mark and I knew a lot of the same people in Manchester, but we never met. I'd moved to London. Having said all that about Tony Wilson, I did move to London as a producer at Radio 1, and one of the things I was doing was producing sessions at Maida Vale Studios for the John Peel Show, which again was a bit of a dream, because I'd grown up listening to the John Peel Show. And one day I went down there, and Mark Riley, who'd been in the Fall, he was there with his band, Mark Riley and the Creepers. So, you know, they were recording this music, you know, and it sounded a bit ragged and ramshackle to me. But I said to Mark, I said, "Is that what it's supposed to sound like?" And he said, "Yeah, it sounds great." I said, "Okay, fine. Well, let's do 4 or 5 more like that then." And we got on well there, really. And then after about a couple of years, I came back to Manchester, and I started working again for Piccadilly Radio very briefly before I went to the BBC. And then we reconnected there. We connected to some degree with a guy called Chris Seavey, Frank Sidebottom, who was a comedian with a big papier-mâché head on. And a lot of people sort of played in his band and involved in his shenanigans. And so we got to spend some time together again. And then Mark became a record plugger, a PR man. And I was producing things like Radio 1 in concert. So he would come into the BBC on Oxford Road and sort of try and say, "Oh, you know, I'm working on the Pixies. Do you fancy doing something with them?" and things like that. So then we sort of, that was the start of a sort of more professional footing, really. And it all developed on from there.
As you said, in 1991, you moved to Radio 1. Still in the era of the controller Johnny Beeling. In your opinion, how would you compare the Beeling era to the revolution under Matthew Bannister?
Well, Johnny Beeling was, I mean, he was really, both of those guys were brilliant men in entirely different ways. And they were men from a different age for a different age. So Johnny, really, he was, and I'll always be grateful to Johnny, because Johnny gave me my first job at the BBC. And Johnny was very much into sort of the Radio 1 Roadshow and making it very pop and sparkly and kind of glitzy. And because up until Johnny, the BBC and Radio 1 had sort of been run by rather sort of grey suited BBC staff lifers, people who could one day they might have been running, the home service or something like that, or they might have been running the proms, or they might have been running personnel, or they could have been running anything, and then suddenly they'd be in charge of Radio 1. So I don't think any of the people before Johnny didn't really have a feel for what teenage and pop culture was, and Johnny certainly did. So he made it much more of a kind of showbizy kind of thing, which needed doing. He made it the kind of, the nation's favorite, bright colors and, flashing lights and road shows and all that kind of thing. So Johnny did a brilliant job. It then became apparent that perhaps people, after a generation, that people wanted something different and more kind of cultural and arty, and from Radio 1. You've got to remember it was absolutely pre-internet. So I think people felt that Radio 1, because it was about youth culture, ought to start reflecting kind of, books and films and poetry and more and comedians and different things. And so then it was clear that, a change of direction was needed, and Matthew was the man to do that. And so I think Matthew probably in retrospect will think that he maybe changed too much too quickly. As opposed to use a footballing term, perhaps a blend of youth and experience is what you need for a while. But on the other hand, I think sometimes you do have to be brave. You do have to clear the ground. And you do have to say to these people, you've had a good innings and it's been great and thank you very much. And it's time for someone else now, because none of us can keep these shows forever. I finished on Radio 1 in 2004. So I think that in a way, there probably was no easy way to do it. And Matthew stuck his neck out and did it. And he promoted me through the ranks. So I'll always be grateful to him. But as I say, I think they were both kind of visionaries of the two different things that Radio 1 had been in that time, and they were both good at it.
We got Matthew wrong. How
We got Matthew on the podcast next week.
Oh, have you? Well, I speak to Matthew. I do speak to Matthew still, because he's working in. I do the Radio 2 folk show, and he does the folk podcast, Folk on Foot, which you'll know all about. And so I'm still in touch with Matthew. Yeah. Well, send him my best when you see him.
Breakfast shows have historically been viewed as the flagship program on the station. Why do you think you and Large struggled with the breakfast show?
I think that, yeah, I mean, the thing was, we were on late at night and we were just sort of doing this a big successful program, but it was a sort of big cultish thing. It wasn't really mainstream. And then we were going to come off that and we were going to go on to the afternoons, which is a kind of not quite the full glare of publicity. And the breakfast show was. So when we went on the breakfast show, taking over from Chris Evans, I think we felt that because Chris Evans had been sort of, big in showbiz and London, and had been seen in all the clubs and all that, I think me and Mark felt, and certainly someone in management must have felt, that kind of these two down-to-earth blokes from the north would make a contrast to that. Well, it certainly made a contrast to that, but I think what we didn't realise was that people do want some kind of bright and brash energy in the morning to keep them going. And our sort of sense of humour and our shtick, if you like, was based on kind of bumbling around between records and being sort of self-deprecating and not being very showbiz. And we were completely the opposite of Chris Evans, really. And so I think that we probably didn't really. I don't think we really thought that we would. I don't think we thought we would fail, but I think we thought people would find us a refreshing change, and they didn't. And looking back on it, I can see why. Again, like we were talking about Matthew taking over, it sort of demolished what a Radio 1 breakfast show had been up to that point. And it sort of reinvented it, but it kind of reinvented it badly. It was like it sort of wasn't broke, and we tried to fix it in a way. But I think we weren't at fault in as, I think we could only, that's the only thing we could do. we couldn't really suddenly become what Chris Evans was, or what, you know, the sort of the smashy and nicey DJs were. We couldn't do it. And so I think we were at fault. I think the people who put us there were also at fault, which they acknowledged. And I think it was just too much of a leap for us. And from then we went on to the afternoons, and that worked out really well for us. But again, we were very lucky that Matthew didn't just sack us, really, and that he kept us on and he gave us something else to do, or else we would. I think it probably would have finished at that point, which would have been sort of what 30 years ago or something. But I'm still here, so it's all worked out. But I don't think we really understood what a breakfast show was. It was a miserable experience, you know. I mean, apart from anything else, I mean, to state the obvious, you've got to get up really early. No one wants to do that, do they? So I mean, it wasn't our best time. No.
And throughout the history of radio, there's always been a surreal, anarchic strand, which is ever present from the Goons to Kenny Everett to Steve Wright.
Yeah.
You and Mark Riley managed to update this style of radio for the 90s.
I mean, that sounds kind of that we had a grandiose plan. Let's update Radio Surreal. You're right. I mean, you're right. It probably does start with the Goons. I mean, it might go slightly back before there was things like Round the Horn and things like that, you know. So yeah, you're right. There has always been that, and you know, people like Chris Morris and things. You know, we're doing a lot of interesting stuff. I think really, me and Mark, honestly, we were just trying to make each other laugh. It was like if we were in the pub and we tried to make each other laugh, and we'd sort of just take the piss of bands and sort of, like, let's just do the Kraftwerk story. Let's re-record all Kraftwerk songs by playing the drums on a washing up bowl and a bit Bon Tempi organ, and it'll sound terrible, which is sort of how the Shiros started, really. We were just trying to make each other laugh. And so I think there were people around at that time who gave us encouragement, not by personally, but by what they were doing. Like certainly Reeves and Mortimer on the telly, we felt very much a kinship with them, and we had the same agent, so we did know them. So I think that, and we were just trying to be silly and not take ourselves too seriously. We weren't trying to do anything satirical. We were just trying to be daft and make each other laugh, really. So I don't think we had a grandiose plan, and also we didn't think it would last, really. You know, we just thought we were just messing about. We were trying to find the best records and bands we could. But we were just having a laugh, and we didn't think it would last. We thought Mark would go back to being a PR man and I go back to being a producer, and we'd have had a little laugh with it. So we took a lot of risks because we weren't really planning it as a career at that point. And so, yeah, I do think that it's kind of what you said. And I think we do slot into a kind of a line that you can trace back to those programs that you mentioned. I wonder if it's still alive on the radio now. I think that's one of my sadnesses, really, is I don't hear anyone really not attempting to do what we did, but like you said, following on. We weren't trying to be the Goons, but they started doing something different, and I don't hear anybody trying anything different in that way, really, and I feel sad about that.
Okay. No, like you can have time and more
Not a lot of radio
space.
just so you think there's not a lot of radio space anymore either.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot of control, I think. Certainly commercial radio, I know friends on commercial radio, and you've not got really much room to do anything improvised or off the script, because half the time you're doing links which are going out on 10 different stations, not only different parts of the country, but playing different kinds of music. So you can't even announce the records, because you'll be doing this link and then it'll be a rock show, or it'll be a country show, or it'll be whatever, or a dance show, or whatever it'll be. And yeah, I think you're certainly right. I mean, when we started, no one interfered, really. There was no real concept of compliance. You didn't have to tell them in advance what you were doing. You just did it, and that doesn't really happen anymore. Yes, you could do scripted comedy, and Radio 4 still do things. But in terms of it just flowing out of the kind of the format of a pop radio record show. I don't think there's anything like that, really. I mean, the closest thing I would think, really, is me and Stuart at the weekends now. But I mean, that's a very different thing. It's just two blokes talking. It's certainly not any constructed and recorded sketches and things like that. I mean, the Mark and Lard show was really elaborate. I mean, you couldn't afford it now, because in those days we just used to go in the studios and we had nothing else to do. So we'd go in the studio all day and mess about and record something, and it might come work to be something on the show. It might not, but we'd had quite a nice time doing it. Whereas now, and fair enough, for now, because of the license fee, every studio hour you book at the BBC has to be paid for and charged to a different program code and things like that. And that's fair enough. Some people would say you shouldn't have been allowed to be going in and just wasting the license fee. But the studio was sitting empty, so we didn't really see anything problematic with that. But no, you can't do you can't do that anymore now.
You mentioned slightly just there, Shire horses. Where did the idea of Shire horses really come from?
Well, we on the nighttime show, on the 10 till midnight show on Radio 1, me and Mark, we started doing, I think, a thing called The Story of Pop, or Great Moments in Pop, or something. So I mentioned Kraftwerk. I said, well, Kraftwerk discovered the electronic keyboard or something, and they would play. And so we would start to do a kind of a takeoff of Kraftwerk, and we would just sort of re-record things, and re-record David Bowie songs and things, and say these were the originals, and they sounded absolutely terrible, deliberately so, and also because we weren't good enough to make them sound like they were good. And then when we got on the Breakfast Show, we started doing that. And I think the first one we did was John Squire, after he left the Stone Roses, he formed a little band. That sounded a bit disparaging. He formed a band for a while called the Seahorses. And they had their debut single was Love Is the Law. And we think we played that. Maybe it was Breakfast Show Record of the Week or something. So, and the chorus of that was, now I know where I'm going. And we did our version, Now I Know Where I'm Going, Our Kid, about like getting lost on the way to a gig and Mark Riley driving the van and, full ineptitude. And they were called the Seahorses, so we called ourselves the Shire Horses, which seemed like the most lumbering, un-rock and roll thing you could call a band. It seemed like the worst name for a group you could imagine. And so then we started doing all these takeoff of other people's stuff, and people liked it. And so then we went out on the road and did it, and that led to us having a deal for 2 albums, which got in the charts. So that sort of. It was amazing, really. We just started making each other laugh in a little room in Manchester, and suddenly, we were playing the Sheffield Arena and things. It was crazy. It was crazy, and we got in the charts with these albums. So that was it. And in fact, recently, Mark Riley wanted to do a reunion tour of the Shire Horses, but I didn't feel like I could go back to being that guy again. So we've been doing some audience with Mark and Lard chat shows instead. But yeah, that was how it started. Just us kind of lovingly but ineptly creating some of our favourite songs to go out on the late night show. That was where it began.
And if you look at someone like me, you that what he did about that long
Questions?
movie. Walking
Moyles. Just saying, if you look at someone like Chris Moyles, that's the sort of thing he did a bit later on as well.
He did a bit. I mean, we knew Chris, and we were friends and everything. I think his humour, one other thing I would say, and I haven't seen Chris for a long time. His humour was a bit crueler, I think. I mean, it wasn't really intentionally, I don't think, but his was a more sort of personal style of humour, really. I think Mark and ours was Mark and mine was a lot sort of gentler, really. It was just stupid. It wasn't really. I don't think it was affectionate parodies of people. We only did people's records or did things that we liked, with the possible exception of Craig David. But I mean, we did sort of it was all done with affection and love, I think, really. And then it was just daft. It didn't, I don't think any of our things ever really set out to hurt anyone or pillory anyone or, seriously undermine or, decry anybody. But Chris certainly, yeah, he had an anarchic kind of, bent running through his show as well. But I think his was more kind of personal relationship based, and ours was just more sort of, in a way, almost kind of fantasy based, really. I think ours was just. It was just stupid. It was just daft flights of fancy, really. It wasn't really it wasn't really a battle. A lot of humor became kind of a bit more vicious and a bit more of personal attacks. And I don't think we were ever that.
Where is Fat Barry White now?
Well, it was Fat Harry White was our character, which was based on Barry White. And I used to do that voice. People were quite surprised because Mark Riley Lard used to do most of the character voices, and that was one of the very few I did. That started because I'd seen an article about Barry White saying that he liked to make love to his wife on the dining room table. And I thought, well, given the size of Barry White, that's a hell of a boast for a dining room table. And so I decided to do this thing about it with Barry White. And so I got Chris, the engineer, to put a pitch shifter on to take my voice really low. And because I wasn't very good at it, my voice kept lapsing back from what I was trying to do Barry White, like, maybe me and my good boy together now. He was doing that, but then it would sort of lapse into my Boltonian accent, my Manchester accent. Me and my lady were just having a lovely time the other night, and it sort of, and we found that the ineptitude of that was funnier than if I'd been able to do the voice. So it carried on from there. And he became one of our most popular characters. He was kind of his radio things were diaries, and he told you what he'd been up to. Now, there are some people who say they were extraordinarily rude and laced with innuendo. I might say that he was just a nice guy telling you what he'd been up to. He never swore. And so there was a sort of innocence to him as well. So that was the thing, that did he know what he was saying? I mean, clearly we knew what he was saying, but did he know what he was saying? But people love him. And when we're doing these shows with Malcolm Lard, when you go in to see us in the theatres, the first voice you hear is Fat Harry White, who welcomes you to the theatre. So he's still a big part of the Malcolm Lard thing, yeah.
And in 2004, you and Lard said farewell to Radio 1. Looking at your Radio 1 tenure as a whole, how do you feel the relationship between network and listener changed?
Well, it's interesting, really. I mean, again, we were in an age before social media. So I suppose you could say that the accessibility and connectivity and between listener and presenter, radio show, whatever you like to call it, I suppose that's greater than it's ever been. When we started, I mean, you've got to remember, when we started, it was an absolute revolution on the nighttime show when fax was invented. Before fax, people wrote in with notepaper or on a postcard, and you got it 2 weeks later. So the idea of people reacting to something there and then, and we used to have Simon Armitage on, who's now the Poet Laureate, and another poet called Ian Macmillan, and Ian used to construct, once we got fax, Ian had an idea and he used to construct poems on air. He got people to fax in different lines and then he put it together. And that was just a revolution. It was amazing. So I think in terms of actual access, clearly things are much easier and better now. I think what's been lost really is that when we were on at night, and I say it's pre-internet, pre-social media, if you were a kid, especially if you're a kid who felt like they didn't perhaps quite fit in with mainstream, you wanted to hear some different music, you wanted to know what films and books were at. Our nighttime show, and I'm not just saying this, people have said this to me repeatedly, that it was kind of their internet. They would hear about all these things. And so that real bond and connection with that show and feeling that you were in a club and a gang with people like you, I'm not sure that exists in the same way anymore. I mean, and look at my kids. I don't think they have an affinity to a radio station or a radio show in the way we did, or when we were on, because you've just got access to everything all the time now. So I think that in some ways, obviously, the connection is stronger, but in some kind of I don't what's the right word? I don't want to say spiritual. It sounds much too grand, but in some kind of way, it's also weaker because you just don't feel you've got the bond. You don't feel like you depend on hearing that radio show in the same way.
부간 몸이 봄 이런 해 흐랑이 나의 라이트야 불금 엄마
When Josh spoke to Ian Lee, he said that he sort of prefers late night radio because it's its own sort of community.
I think that's true in a way. I mean, I don't know. I mean, yeah, I think in the afternoon we felt a bit of that. I mean, certainly I think that because I'm now on Six Music, even though I'm on at sort of 8 till 10 in the morning, because it's a kind of DAB station, and you think people have to work a bit harder to find it. So the people who have found it and want what Six Music wants, with a lot of new music and things, I think there's an element of community to that, but I think you're right. I mean, I think that that nighttime show did a very special thing. It is like the rest of the world's gone to sleep and we're still here doing this. And so I think you're right. I got tired of doing it. I did a late night show on Radio 1, and then when I left Radio 1 in 2004, I did a late night show on Radio 2, which was when I moved across there, which I did on my own before I started working with Stuart. And the only thing I found was really that I think whatever time of day you're working, you don't really relax in a day until you've done the work that you've got to do. And so even though you were off all day, you were still kind of looking at the watch and, building up to it, wondering what you were going to do. And then, of course, you'd come back at 12, well, you finish at 12, you come back at 1, and then your brain would be worried, so you wouldn't get to sleep till 3 or whatever, and then I had quite young children at that time, so I was trying to sleep while my wife was taking the kids to school. And I didn't like that anymore. I think it was okay when May and Mark were young and we didn't have families and everything. It was also exciting, but I wouldn't want to do that again, I don't think.
Double acts always fascinate Josh in how they almost become one entity. So when you left Radio 1, was there ever a sense that you and Lard would continue to work together?
There wasn't, no. I mean, I think we probably thought there would be the odd project. I think we might have done a football DVD just after we left, I think. But I think that I think we felt that if we were going to go our separate ways, it would be better to have a clean break, I think. I think certainly for Mark, because like it had been Mark and Lard, so I'd sort of been Mark, I'd sort of been myself, and Lard had been playing all these different characters and doing the daft voices. And so I think he very much felt like he wanted to see if he could do a show on his own, because he didn't want to be doing that for the rest of his life. And I understand that. So I don't think that we ever really felt that we would do another show together at that point. And we haven't really. We just came back to do these things, these live shows, really, to celebrate or commemorate 20 years since the Radio 1 show finished. And what we getting back together has been quite interesting, because we didn't really know if we'd still have any kind of rhythm, but we found we slipped back into it quite easily, really. But we're sort of almost like two Lucy Worsleys now. We're looking back at two historic characters called Mark and Lard. We're not trying to be Mark and Lard. We're talking about who we were then, and that's good. And we don't talk over each other, and we seem to have a kind of rhythm of talking, with each other that seems to work. But I don't think either of us, people have said, oh, you want to do a new Mark and Lard show or a Mark and Lard podcast and everything. I don't think either of us can really work out what Mark and Lard, who they would be now, because so much time has gone by and we're not the same people. So I think we've no plans to do that, because I think that people love that show and remember it very fondly. And if we did something new that wasn't as good, it would disappoint people, And so I think that it was a long time ago, and we're very proud of it. But we've no plans to. I mean, we talk about a couple of little things, and there's a book being done, and we'll probably do a couple of bits and pieces together. But I don't think Mark and Lard will ever be reunited in the way it was. No.
Would you ever do another live show?
Would you ever do another live show?
With Lard. Yeah, well, I mean, we've got 6 more to do this year. No, none near the Isle of Wight, I'm afraid. I think the closest we got to you was Brighton, but we've done that, and so that's not that. But so we've done that. But we've decided it's going to finish in Edinburgh in May, so that will be that. We've got a little idea of a podcasty thing which we might do, but it's not really a Mark and Lard thing. It's another idea presented by Mark Radcliffe and Mark Riley, but it's not a Mark and Lard thing. So we've got another little idea about that, but we haven't done much about it. And then if we do this book, well, this book is happening. Someone's writing it. We're doing lots of kind of long conversations, which someone's then listening to and transcribing, because I think that's the best way of a book, because then you get the rhythm of the two of us talking with each other, to each other.
Yeah.
And I suppose there's a possibility that when the book comes out, we'll do some kind of literary festivals and things like that. But I honestly think that's it. I think that's as much as we'll do. So it's been great, but I think that, you don't want to be seen to be, going on forever doing it, and the attendance is dropping off a bit, and you're playing to half empty places and stuff. So I think that we've enjoyed it, but we'll have done about 30 shows by the time we finish. But I think we feel, well, that's that done, and it was great, But let's move on again.
Oh, it's rolling. Yeah. You're so well. So,
He tried to get tickets for his show, but they'd all sold out. So
Well, you should have told us. We'd have got you. We'd have got you in. We've got you in. I mean, you're on the Isle of Wight, so if you want to go anywhere handy for you, like Norwich or Edinburgh, and I'll put you on the guest list. I don't think I can't help. I can't help you more than that. I don't think we've got anything. Yeah, we're just going. East and north now. Now I'll tell you, we've got a show on the Isle of Man. Then I mean, that's an island. That must be all right. That must be
better than Norwich.
Yeah. So sorry about that. If you'd let us know, I would have been delighted to let you in, of course.
You mentioned it a little bit earlier, but in 2007 you embarked upon another partnership with Stuart McConey. Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
What reservations did you have about forging another on-air partnership?
Well, I suppose my main reservation was like, do people think I can't do it on my own? It was like, because, I'd just done 3 years on that nighttime show. And I think the thing was that Stuart and I had known each other for a long time, and Stuart had been a guest on the radio on the late night show. He'd been quite a regular guest on that. And so we knew each other, and we'd always got on well, and we'd always sort of had a laugh. And then it was one of his book launches, I think, and we were talking and said, well, maybe we'll do something together one day. And the word of that got back to a woman called Leslie Douglas, who was the head of Radio 2 at that time. And she said, well, I think this is a great idea. Let's do it. And so she'd agreed to give me, I didn't want to work late nights like we were talking about before. So she'd agreed to give me a mid-evening show. So I think it was 8 till 10 maybe. Or 7 till 9 or something like, I can't remember. And I think at that point, Stuart had just been offered the breakfast show on 6 Music, I think. And so Leslie said, well, decide what you want to do. And Stuart said, well, look, you decide, because it's your show at the moment, and I've been given this. So you decide. And I decided just to give it a go and see how it went. But it's a very different thing from Mark and Lard, because Mark and Lard was kind of me, and Lard was the sidekick whose role kind of grew throughout it and became more of a double act. Whereas Stuart and I still don't think Stuart and I think of ourselves as a double act. We think of ourselves as, sorry, I'm just plugging the mains in, then it doesn't. That Stuart and I think of ourselves as, 2 solo acts who work together, really, I think. So I don't think either of us. I think we feel, we feel we're on equal footing. I always remember that John Peel's producer, a great guy called John Walters. He said the relationship between me and Peel is. He said that it's like it's really loyal. He said it's like a man and his dog, but each of us thinks the other one's the dog. And I always love that. So I think that me and Stuart perhaps a bit like that. But so I did have reservations, yeah. But I mean, it has worked out. It has worked out really well, I think, and it has given us something that I don't think is happening much elsewhere on the radio, where you've just got that kind of absolute live sort of stream of consciousness just sort of reacting to what's coming in. And that's, of course, the thing, like, goes back to what we were talking about before. Of course, me and Mark had to generate everything we were going to say ourselves. Whereas now, me and Stuart say something, and then it'll immediately result in a flood of emails which come in before you next link's on. So you can filter stuff, and it kind of sustains itself, really. So in that way, doing something like that's got a lot easier, I think. But it's worked out. It's worked out okay. But also, I still do this Radio 2 folk show on my own, and Stuart has his Freak Zone show, and he does Loose Ends on Radio 4 sometimes on it. So we do, I think. And he does all his books, and I do all my music and things. So we've got projects separate from each other. We only see each other 2 days a week, not 5 days a week like we used to. So I think it's a nice partnership, and we have sort of trust in each other, I think, and we make each other laugh. But it's not the whole of our lives. It's not all consuming. I think I would say that one of the reasons it works is because we're friends but not best friends, so it's a professional friendship, which sounds cynical, and it's not. We get on fine, but we don't see each other outside of doing the show, really. I mean, he lives in Birmingham, I live in Cheshire, and so and it's great. I think it's successful because we don't overwork that relationship. Mark and I were different. We were both growing up in public, and it was something that we were younger, and it was a different time in our lives, so it's been very different. But I mean, yeah, it's amazing to think, really. Is that right? 2007 I started with Stuart. Is that right? Yeah, is it? Right. So that means that next year we'll have been together 20 years, which is a lot longer than I was ever with Lard.
Yeah. Speaking of on-air partnerships, for 2 decades you presided over the coverage of Glastonbury alongside friend of the podcast, Joe Wiley. In what ways has technology played a role in bringing the TV audience closer to live music?
Well, I mean, now you stream every stage, don't you? And you can take your pick. So now, when I started, it used to be, yeah, I mean, I think when I started and it was on Channel 4, I think we would have perhaps filmed, I don't know, 2 or 3 stages, I think. I don't know. And it was, so you got what you were given, really, rather like when in the golden age of Match of the Day. It was the only football on the telly that week, wasn't it? You couldn't see a live game ever, unless it was FA Cup final or World Cup final day. And so now, rather like you can stream any music at any time, anywhere in the world. Now when you get on Glastonbury and they've got a stream from every stage and you can select between, it's extraordinary. It brings its own problems, as they found out with the Bob Villain thing, didn't they? But yeah, I mean, in the time that I was doing it, technology and digital transmission of that completely changed everything. Completely changed everything, and it's a lot better for it. I think you've got a lot more. You've got a lot more choice.
We use the blood of your right.
He said he used to love your relationship on air with Joe Wiley.
Yeah, I did too. I saw Joe on last week on Wednesday. Yeah, it's always lovely to see her. We had a really nice relationship. I mean, I think that I made her a bit sillier and she made me a bit cooler, but we got on. We really got on well. We liked that a lot, and she still says she misses before when she's going to Glastonbury. She still says, "I still miss you not being here," and so that's sweet and that's nice. I mean, do I miss it? I'm not really so much. I did it for a long time, and I do really think that sometimes you have to know when it's over, you know. Well, I knew it when it was over, when they told me I wasn't doing it anymore. So but you know, I said that's fine. You know, I've had a good innings. And not all of us only get these jobs and these opportunities because someone else has left or been pushed out. That's the same with any world. It's the same with any line of work, isn't it? You know, and so I enjoyed it hugely. And but I was happy to leave. Really, I'd done a lot of Glastonbury's, 30 or something, and you know, it was hard work as you get older. And if the weather's terrible, it's horrible. And you know, it's been absolutely joyous and a big thing for me. But I don't. No, I've no desire to. I don't wish you'd have gone on longer. I think, you know, it was the right time. I think, you know, it was kind of, we did a couple of strange ones. We did one, certainly, me and Joe, where there was no festival. We did it from Glastonbury in lockdown, and we just stood in the fields, which I enjoyed that. I think that might have been my last one, and I think that's quite a nice way to go out, really. So my last memories of Glastonbury are just rolling hills and fields, and so that's quite nice. But yeah, no, Joe and I had a real bond, and you know, we're still friends and we still talk. So yeah, that's nice.
Last couple of questions.
Sure.
Looking back at your career, what would you say your proudest achievement was?
I suppose, you know, it would be Mark and Love, because I think that show, as the live shows we've been doing, you know, that show kind of was one for the ages, really. It's one that it's 20 years ago since it finished, and you still meet people all the time who seem to know every word and every character and every sketch that appeared on it, you know. So I think I'll always be very proud of that, and I think that we sort of changed for a while anyway what a pop radio show could be. I think we had sort of ambition, you know. We can't, and I don't mean personal ambition to be successful. I think we just had ambition creatively to think there's more you can do between the records than just tell people what the records were and what time it is, you know. And so I feel proud about that. But I also feel proud that I'll feel very proud, I think, in 3 years' time I'll have done 50 years in radio. And that will be 2029. Yeah, I'll have done 50 years in radio, and I'll be really proud of that, because I don't think many people do that. I don't know whether anyone will ever get the chance to do 50 years in radio ever again. And so, and I think in that time, you know, introduced people to a lot of good music that they might not have otherwise have heard, and made them laugh perhaps occasionally. And so, yeah, I just feel proud of the kind of the longevity of it, really. I think, yeah, but certainly, I think Mark and Lar will always be the kind of high watermark in terms of show making impact, you know.
And it can
Mark and Lard. How do you think Mark and Lard changed radio?
Well, just think really by you know, trying to do a little comedy show in between each record, really, you know, by just sort of as I said, really, not just thinking, right, we'll play these records and we'll read out requests and tell people the time and do the traffic, you know. And we did all those things. All those things are fine and good, you know. I think we felt that, like, there's an opportunity here to kind of, we've got national airwaves and we can do what we like. So let's do something that no one particularly has done before. Let's try it. And it won't all be good. And you know, some of it might be awful, but at least, you know, it's like, let's try and sort of aim high and do something that's sort of brave and different and hadn't been done before. And these thoughts all sound very grand, I think, in retrospect. At the time, honestly, we were just trying to make each other laugh. You know, we didn't really think about the audience very much. We just think, what would we and our mates like to hear? You know, like, what was that thing you were saying in the pub about, like, you know, whatever it was about, you know, the fiery wire. What was that you were saying? Let's try that. You know, it was kind of hand to mouth, but it was really, you know, just something that was it was very selfish in a way. It was very selfish. We were just doing it for ourselves, to amuse ourselves, and then we assumed after a year or 2 years that they'd say, "Oh, well, that was an interesting experiment. You can go back to your day jobs now." And we say, "Yeah, fine, okay, let's do that then." And here we are all this time later, and we're all still here.
do you think who get that more.
Do you think people get that freedom anymore?
No.
No.
Don't think so. Not that I know of. I think the people who get the most freedom that I know of at the moment is me and Stuart on Six Music. I don't think, certainly you wouldn't get, I know for a fact you wouldn't get that freedom on commercial radio anywhere. Would you get that freedom anywhere else on the BBC? I mean, obviously Radio 4 programs are all scripted. In terms of pop things on Radio 2, I think in Radio 2, you know, something died with Steve Wright in that sense. You know, I think there's still some freedoms, and in Radio 2, I think, you know, for all the faults of the BBC and all the issues it's had, I think if there is any freedom, it's in radio, it's at the BBC. I think it's generally run by grown-ups and people who understand radio and understand that a link sometimes could be 30 seconds, or the next day it could be 6 minutes because something's running. It can't always be 90 seconds to hit the advert. So I think there are people at the BBC who understand that well. And certainly there are freedoms to play the music that you like at the BBC and on Stuart's show, you know, and doing the folk show, no one tells us what to play, just me and the producer John pick it all. So there are freedoms, but in terms of doing a mainstream pop show where you just did on air the first thing that popped into your head, really, and not worry about it, I think that's probably gone, yeah.
And just finally, you've obviously mentioned about the shows that you've got coming up, but what's next for Mark Radcliffe?
Well, what's next is probably, in terms of radio, as I say, I'm not building a career, so I'm not looking to do anything else. I'm not looking to move stations. I'm looking to try and stay there till 2029, then I can hit that 50-year milestone. And I do lots of music. I play in an acoustic duo with my friend David Baldwin. Paul Armfield is always trying to get us down to do a show at his bookshop, which I would love to do. We'll get there sometime. I've got all the time in the world for Paul. I think he's brilliant. And you're doing a show with him, so that's fantastic. You know, when's that? When's your show?
October of this year.
October. Oh, well, maybe we'll try and get down for that and do a gig in Paul's shop at the same time. But it's a bit of a long way from Manchester. That's the problem. That's the problem. So doing that. I'm playing lots of music. I still play with all my old sort of folk rock family, my home mates occasionally. And I mean, you know, just keep on keeping on, really. As I say, I'm not building a career, so I've got no burning ambitions. We did a book last year, which was my 6th book, which was about me and my wife and my dog going to Rome. We called Et tu Cavapoo, and we did that, and that's been okay, and quite enjoyed that. But I sort of, writing I don't really like. Writing a proper book, it's kind of like, it's a lot of work. It's like doing a dissertation, and I can't bother. I'd rather have a pint and read the paper and walk the dog, really. So I'm 67, I'm not building a career, but I'd like to get to that 50-year landmark, yeah.